It was a commuter's worst nightmare. A major interstate bridge collapsed during rush hour.
One of the main iconic bridges in the Twin Cities has collapsed.
The entire bridge is in the water. 35W Bridge is in the water,
leaving dozens of cars and trucks trapped in the wreckage.
The flames are very close to that school bus. There are cars on fire right now.
Sending others plunging into the Mississippi River.
This is really awful. It's the most awful thing I've ever seen.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast, Emotional Grit. I'm your host, Jennifer Fernjack, and today's guest is Garrett Ebling. He's an author and podcast host who survived the Interstate 35W Bridge collapse in 2007. And today he's here to share his harrowing story. So, Garrett, let's get started. I know that since that happened, I mean, just for context, for people who aren't from Minnesota, 35W is an actual freeway that runs from Minnesota down to Texas. And there's an actual bridge in Minneapolis that crosses the Mississippi River that's just shy of about 2,000 feet. 4 lanes wide, north and south, 110 feet up in the air. And you have a story in tandem with that, obviously, because you survived when it collapsed back in 2007. So I know that on that day, it starts with you being at happy hour and with some colleagues, I believe. And could you take it from there as far as being in rush hour and just kind of how things ensued?
Yeah, so it was a special day for work because that day we decided we had our summer picnic. And so instead of being in the office that day, like any other normal day would have been, we had decided to go to the Como Zoo in St. Paul and spend the day there doing some team bonding. And so after that, we all decided to go do a happy hour after that. And it was also a celebration of sorts. I'd gotten engaged like that weekend before, so that was a Wednesday, so just a handful of days, and so everyone was in a celebratory mood. Got a card and we had some apps and all that, so it got to be around 6 o'clock and everybody has their families that we have to get back to, and it's midweek, and so we all just sort of went our separate ways, and at that point I was probably just 3 or 4 miles from the bridge. And so then it was just, a matter of fact, hopping on to the interstate and dealing with the rush hour traffic. So I was just sort of slowly making my way towards the bridge around 6 o'clock when it fell.
So from what I remember, when I had interviewed you for my book, I remember you talking about how ahead of you on the bridge, you could see tail lights, that maybe just random brake lights, all of a sudden became this sea of orange before the cars just disappear. Do you remember just what your split second thinking was when all of a sudden all these cars on the bridge ahead of you just disappeared?
Yeah, traffic was really bad because it was rush hour, but also they were doing construction on the bridge, so they had shut down a lane, and so everybody's trying to merge over, and so it was real slow. You're kind of when you're kind of stuck in traffic, you're sort of in a daydream mode, and you're fiddling with the radio station, or you're just thinking about the day, and so I was just sort of in traffic. I was trying to work my way to the right lane because I thought if traffic was going to remain bad, then I would try to exit off of the interstate and find an alternate route home. So I wasn't kind of in the process of that, but your brain's just kind of like you're there, but you're not there. You're just sort of meandering in thought, and that's what really stirred me back into reality was when all of those brake lights in front of me went on at the same time, because obviously it was like, oh, what's going on, and so that's what was the first hint that something was happening. Not necessarily that something that was bad was happening, but something had happened. And within just a couple seconds after that, all of the brake lights in front of me on all those cars just disappeared. They dropped out of sight. And your brain can't register that, right? It's surreal. And all of a sudden, I remember just kind of like taking a deep breath and just trying to take in what had just happened. And also thinking, oh my gosh, something horrible has just happened in front of me. But I also had this sort of fake sense of safety right at that moment. Something had happened to the cars in front of me, but I was okay. What I didn't understand was that, I was just the next domino to fall as that bridge fell in pieces.
Well, and I remember too when we had spoke before about how you mentioned locking your arms on the steering wheel, and either you said out loud or you thought to yourself, one or the other, ride it out, ride it out, ride it out.
Yeah, yeah. I it when I look back at it, it's sort of like a Wile E. Coyote moment in a sense. Here I was trying to, I was bracing myself, thinking that I could somehow stop myself from whatever was about to happen or was happening. And so yeah, I remember having my legs just stretched out and braced, and my arms were braced like this. And I at that moment, I didn't know the bridge well enough to know where I was in relationship to the river below or how high up I really was. So I wasn't. So I was preparing or trying to protect myself from something that I really had no idea what I was protecting myself from.
Yeah.
And I ended up falling over 100 feet, and my car fell nose first. And therefore, the brunt of the injuries that I took were to my face and my arms, just from the impact.
Well, and on top of you actually going down then with the bridge, didn't your car also collide with another one that was coming towards you midair?
Yeah, there was a car, like I said, the bridge is full of cars, and there were multiple lanes of traffic. And so as the car fell, and this is something I'm told, I don't remember this, but as my car fell, the car next to me, we sort of bumped each other's sides, sort of did a side swipe, and then it tumbled into the river. And yeah, I don't remember anything past the point of just falling. I don't remember impact. I don't remember being rescued or pulled from the river either. In fact, I don't remember anything until 3 weeks after the bridge collapsed.
Funny how that works. How the mind can just separate from the body and not have any idea what's going on.
Right.
I
I
remember
mean, it's kind of ironic that I was there, but I was maybe the last person to find out that the bridge had collapsed.
Yeah, no.
To really understand what had happened.
So it's my understanding that there were two good Samaritans who saved you. One was a gentleman from Wisconsin, I believe, and another was a person who was going to be going to the dental student or the dental school at the University of Minnesota. Two people didn't even know each other, just randomly stopped to help. And I remember one of the things that you had shared with me before that just really just gave me a moment of pause and weighed on my heart was that when the Good Samaritans had got to the river, that they had to make a decision because there were so many people in cars. And of course, there was the current of the river, the Mississippi River. There was the rebar that was now exposed, the chunks of concrete, just all this chaos. And so the Good Samaritans knew that if they couldn't keep themselves safe, they couldn't then help anybody else. So part of the problem later was that I'm not sure if it was PTSD or what it was that affected at least one of the Good Samaritans because he felt as though in that moment he had to play God. I mean, he had to decide who to save because of the fact that, again, with the concrete and the rebar and the current and what have you, if he was in a position of danger himself, he couldn't help anybody else. So thankfully, you were in a position where you could be helped. But can you expand on that at all as far as just how it impacted not just the people who obviously like yourself went down with the bridge, but just the Good Samaritans as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the gentlemen, and there was two younger gentlemen that helped get me out of my car. I was unable to do it myself. My seatbelt that I was wearing had jammed, and the door wouldn't open. I did have my driver's side window down. It was a hot early August day, and so they were able to eventually pull me out of the window. Yeah, one of those two individuals grew up on the Mississippi River in Wisconsin. So he was familiar with how that river behaves, was familiar with the currents, and understood, the danger that lied just in if there hadn't been a collapse, there's danger with that river. And so then throwing in debris in that river makes it even more dangerous. So he knew that. He did tell me that, yeah, he had to make decisions. He knew some areas would be too dangerous, and he knew that he ultimately wasn't going to be able to help some people that he wanted to help, and that there might be, fatal consequences for that. It just so happened that my car was in a place where he felt he could get to, and I was about a third of the way in the river, from the shore. Um, my car did land somewhat on some concrete. That's probably what kept me alive, as a matter of fact, because had my car not landed on concrete, had it fell completely into the river, I would have drowned for sure. Um, when they did pull me out, I had water up to my chest. So
Wow.
definitely, how I landed helped save my life.
Wow.
But yeah, that gentleman, I talked to him on and off, and he still struggles with what he saw, and I've talked to him about, maybe counseling would be a good idea for you. And up to the last time that I talked to him, he had declined to do that. But I do know that that there were many people like him who suffered mental trauma because of that, and a lot of them too, where I was given resources as a direct survivor to try to help myself through those. I know there are many people that didn't have that opportunity and still struggle today.
Right. So for those Good Samaritans to actually get you out of your car, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was that they got you out of your car and the one Good Samaritan laid on the water, like floated on his back. And the other one, I believe, put you on top of him, almost using the first Good Samaritan as some kind of a raft, and then pulled you both to shore. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what they told me. Again, all of this is like
Right.
now I was conscious. It wasn't the fact that I was unconscious. I was conscious. They told me that they were asking me questions. They asked me where I was from. And I told them my hometown versus where I lived in the cities.
Oh.
So I guess maybe that I don't. I guess when maybe someone asks me where I'm from, and I think like, oh, where's my where am I from? Where's my hometown? Right? Like, so I gave them some bad information. But but we were talking. I was bleeding profusely. But they loaded me on one of them and kind of used that person as a raft, so to speak, to get me to shore. By the time I got to shore, the first ambulances were arriving,
Oh.
and I was able to be taken right away. And so within an hour after the bridge collapsed, I was in surgery.
That's amazing. Wow.
Mhm.
So I made sure that as part of my prep for today's podcast that I have a copy of my book here because I knew that I wouldn't be able to actually speak to all the different injuries that you had. I thought I better read it because it was just so extensive. So I'm going to read here
That's good.
the
You can remind me. I might have forgotten a few.
here, right. So the injuries that I have noted here, this paragraph reads, his injuries, so your injuries, included a severed colon, one broken ankle and another shattered, a ruptured diaphragm, a collapsed lung, shattered vertebrae, optic nerve damage, a traumatic brain injury, a shattered arm, missing teeth, and all of your facial plates were shattered as well. And then I also noted here that your mom would later need to provide a picture so that surgeons could try to reconstruct your face. I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
wow, that's quite the list.
Yeah, the impact was, especially to the face, was so severe. The surgeon had told me after the fact that he said it was, it was the equivalent of driving your car 100 miles per hour into a brick wall. Like that was the
Wow.
force that my face took. And so, yeah, obviously it did a lot of damage and required a couple of reconstructive surgeries just to try to
Well,
make me look as close to as I looked as I did before.
right.
Hmm.
So I also remember how you had told me that you've tried to use humor sometimes to kind of get your head around things. And so in reference to your mom bringing in a picture to the hospital, you had said to me something to the effect of, well, could my mom at least have brought a picture of Brad Pitt or something like that? So it was something
Yeah.
where you brought humor into play, which is great because one of the things I've tried to share with my listeners or the people who watch the podcast is that laughter can actually lower stress hormones and can actually influence the feel-good chemicals of the brain. So I know with my situation, as far as having my surgery for a brain tumor back in 2016, I used it as well. So it's interesting how that can play a role in people's recovery and just trying to get through what you've got to get through.
Right, and kudos to Brad Pitt for 15 years later, it still works, right? That
Well, there you go. There you
metaphor
go.
still works for him. Oh yeah,
There,
Brad Pitt's still attractive.
there you go. Exactly. So how long was it in the hospital before you woke up?
Yeah, so I was in a medically induced coma. So they had kept me out while they did these surgeries, and I had half a dozen surgeries or more that over on different days. So they brought me back out. I believe it was August 19th. So August 1st was the accident. August 19th was when I was brought out of the coma. And
Wow.
yeah, I remember waking up. I just remember it being bright, and and at that point I could only see out of one eye, and I couldn't talk. I'd had a tracheotomy, so I just had the hole there, so I couldn't say anything. But my mom was there, and I just remember her saying, Garrett, it's fixable. Everything's fixable, and that's really kind of the first memory that I have of what of my mom and my mom saying that. But at that point, I didn't even have the context to know what is it is fixable even mean, right?
Yeah. Because didn't you also have your jaw wired shut?
Yeah, my jaw was wired shut as well. Yeah, I mean, but coming out of a coma, you don't even know that. Like you don't. I had no idea. I just had no idea.
Okay. So now, as far as your mom even knowing to be at the hospital, how did she find out that you were there? Because I believe your cell phone was actually in the Mississippi River, so people couldn't just call you.
I
So
believe it
how
still
did she even
is
know how
in
to
the
find you?
Mississippi River. I believe it still is in the Mississippi River.
Okay.
Um, Yeah, well, people were looking for me. At the time, I was living with a good buddy of mine. We were roommates, and I didn't come home, so obviously that was a big tip off right there. And so he contacted my mom, and my mom, and he actually went down to the river, tried to talk to whoever he could to find out anything he could. That proved unsuccessful for him. My mom was calling every hospital in Twin Cities, asking them if I was there. She wasn't getting any positive affirmation that I was at any hospital. Um, and my mom was at her parents' house, my grandparents' house at the time, as well. So down by Rochester, so she wasn't around the cities at all. It just the how they actually finally found me or found out where I was is my roommate and friend had been watching TV through the night. If you recall, it was nonstop, 24/7 um, news on the local news, and so uh, he was watching the news, and about 4 a.m. he saw some file footage, and that file footage that he saw somebody on a stretcher. It kind of looked like me. He kind of felt that person might have been me. And so he actually called my boss at like 4 in the morning and asked her what I'd been wearing that day. And through that, they found out that it was me.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even imagine how he felt just kind of putting two and two together. Was it literally like in the middle of the night when he made that or had made that phone call?
Yeah, it was 4:30 in the morning
Wow.
that he called my boss. He's like, "Hey, was Garrett wearing a striped shirt yesterday?" And she's like, "Yeah, we were making fun of him because he looked like Waldo from the Where's Waldo book." And like,
That's awesome.
so always wear something stupid, because if something happens to you, someone will remember what you were wearing and can identify you.
Wow. So when you could finally uh, get out of the hospital bed and work towards some kind of like rehabilitation,
Mhm.
I understand that you had to learn how to swallow again, how to walk again. I mean, what were some of the things you had to learn how to do again?
Yeah, it was basically starting over. I mean, yeah, I had to relearn how to chew my food once my jaw was unwired and they took the feeding tube out of me. Um, and it seems kind of funny or odd that you would need to like retrain yourself to eat, but after so much time, there's you don't really even realize it now, but there's like a cadence that or of timing that happens when you're chewing and swallowing, and so even like that, I remember just like choking on food because I would slip up on that timing and having to just kind of relearn the timing of eating. I went to therapy to I had to relearn how to walk. I had three of my four limbs um, injured in such a way that I couldn't use them, and so at first I had to just be bedridden until I could use two limbs, and then from there it was using a walker with an arm attachment on it, and then from there moving on to a motorized scooter. And so it was also just that, and then also you're just so weak after being in a hospital bed for 2 months to you have to rebuild your stamina, and that takes a
Mhm.
lot of time too.
So, as far as lasting effects, I believe that your smell and taste have been affected. I'm trying to remember from when I wrote about you in my book. There's something to the effect of if you smell, or excuse me, you can't smell cigarette smoke or a campfire, but you can sense the smoke. Is that correct?
Yeah, part of my injury was I severed the olfactory nerves in my nose, so I don't have that sense of smell. Somebody could be cooking in the house, and I wouldn't necessarily know it. But I can pick up like I would almost say like chemicals in the air. So if there's just a fire, like I could pick up that there's smoke, or
That's interesting.
if you like or like perfume, like I can tell when somebody's wearing perfume because there's that chemical in perfume.
Yeah.
Um, but it might, I would say, quote unquote, smell different to me than it probably is intended to smell.
Okay.
They like air fresheners, so just all those types of things that have chemicals and vinegar. You know.
Wow. So speaking of vinegar, my aunt had surgery for the same kind of brain tumor as me. Both of us
Mhm.
meningioma tumors, even though they're not genetic. It's just kind of strange that lightning struck twice in one family, but hers was in her olfactory groove part of her head, and to this day, she can't smell or taste things, but she could tell you Coke from Diet Coke. And as far as vinegar goes, if she eats salt and vinegar chips, her mouth still waters from the salt and the vinegar, even though she can't taste the chips. So it's so
Mm.
interesting how the body works, whether it's what I mentioned about her or your situation as far as perfume or smoke from a campfire or what have you. So
Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, your memory plays so much into it too. Like you can still remember smells, right? So I can take that memory and incorporate it into the actual action of
oh,
smelling that I think kind of enhance. I don't know if enhance is the right word, but just sort of to sort of pseudo recreate the smell.
oh,
You know, like I remember what cut lawn grass smells like, right? Um, or a hot asphalt, in the summer. Like you can still remember what those things smell like.
that's fascinating. I would think too, smells associated with like nostalgia. So like I
Hmm.
know for me, I can think about what it smelled like at my grandma's house when I was little. If she made
Hmm.
pancakes in bacon grease, I can still remember the sizzle of the pancakes on the griddle along with that smell. So
Hmm.
I see what you're saying there for sure.
Yeah.
I also remember you sharing about how the physical injuries were somewhat easier to deal with, and I say easier with air quotes, easier to deal with than the emotion or the psychological ones, because at least for the physical ones, there were different ways to try to address them. Whether and you could actually measure them. Like, can you eat now? Can you walk now? Can you do certain things before? Whereas with the emotion and with the psychology of it all, it was kind of a lot to get your head around. So I'm wondering, how did you I guess just kind of move forward, and how were you able to learn from your experience and keep your head above water, no pun intended,
Hmm.
and then now try to pay that forward to other people as far as what you've learned with trauma.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the physical recovery, and I don't think you need to use air quotes. It just is easier because you have expert medical staff that has created a plan, and it has told you if you do A, B, and C, you will have this result. And as long as you stay tried and true to the therapy and the exercise and getting there, and you see the marked results, right? Like you
Yep.
said. And so that part, as grueling as physical therapy was, you could see progress, you could measure it, and you could sort of, have success in that way. The mental part, I was completely unprepared for. There wasn't really anybody explaining to me what I was feeling, why I was feeling it. I eventually, you're not like when you have an injuries, like I fell off the bridge, they send you to the hospital, right? Nobody forces you to go to a therapist or counseling, right? That's a decision that you have to make for the most part. And in my case, it was that my fiance was like, Garrett, your affect, your behavior, your attitude, your mood is something that I can't deal with, and if you don't go get help, there won't be a wedding. And so I went, and even in going, I mean, there's going, and then there's growing, and you
Yeah.
can go
Yeah.
sit on a couch for years, and nothing can change. Um, and that was the case for me for a long time. I was naive as to the the severity of, or the depth of the the trauma that I was dealing with, the post trauma that I was dealing with. I thought I could. There were. I mean, I went through the whole gamut. There were times where I thought I could outsmart it. There were times when I thought I could ignore it. There were times when I thought could just live with it, and other people would just have to accept me being the way I was. I mean, I victimized myself. I said, it's the bridge's fault, so now everybody has to live with the consequence of that. And it it cost me. It cost me for years. I lost my marriage. I lost relationships with people that I had relationships with after I was married and divorced. And it really took me looking at my relationship with my son, and me looking in the mirror, and still continuing to feel numb and frozen and just empty, and ask myself, am I ready to let this relationship with my son go too? Because that was it.
Mhm.
I mean, that was my last relationship. And just like, the alcoholic has to get to the low point.
Yeah.
It was the same for me. And so I would say I lost probably 12 years of my life, because I was not serious enough about making the change. And I say that after writing a memoir about the bridge and my experience, right? I fooled I think I fooled people, and then some people for sure I didn't fool, but all the time I was fooling myself.
And what's your memoir called?
It's called Collapsed: A Survivor's Guide from the Wreckage of the 35W Bridge. So I wrote that, and that was, I think, my son was born. So I think that published like in 2012, 2013.
Mhm.
And, at that point I did feel better, but I wasn't healthy. Um, I had a lot of experience, and I had a lot of revelations, and I was making progress, but I wasn't there. I mean, I just, we always like to think that we're there. We're almost done. We're almost finished with the recovery. And I had to learn that I had a lot of false beliefs in me, and I had to kind of work through those before I could really start making some change.
Okay. So I mentioned your podcast earlier as well. So what's the core theme of your podcast, and what kinds of guests do you have on there? I know that I've been on there, so I'm very happy to say that. But what would you say some of the themes are for your
Yeah,
guests?
yeah. I like to talk to people about their trauma journeys and hoping that we can all together glean something from somebody's story. Hey, we all have great stories, and most of these stories never get shared. But for me, I wanted to provide a way where people could learn something or relate to something. Um, for me, I you know, one of the things, like for me, it all ties back to finding my why. And once, and I did an exercise once for work, and where we read this book by Simon Sinek about finding your why. And I discovered for me, my why was helping people take that next step, taking them from they have a problem or they're stuck in a way, and how can I help them just to get to to the next step, or kind of maybe get unstuck. And that's what I like doing about my work. When I look back at all my past jobs and careers, that all kind of was a theme that weaved through them. But it also stretches into your personal life too, right? And it's because it's your essence, it's your being of who you are. And so for me, it was like I want to use my experience to be able to kind of to feed my soul and feed my why, and then also you doing it in a way that we can help others. So the podcast is a way for me to do that. I do Instagram videos and Facebook videos and blog posts, and just I try to find different ways to just kind of help people, because I don't, like I said, I lost 12 years. I don't want anyone to lose 12 years.
Right.
Our lives are short enough. So if I can help somebody have an aha moment and maybe get them just one step closer to living again, I mean, that's worth it.
I think it's one thing to read facts somewhere, but if you can talk to someone who's had their own trauma, there's credibility there and there's wisdom that comes with that. Not just of what to do, but to also consider what not to do. Kind of like learn from my mistakes, but also learn best practices, and also to let people know that it's okay to talk about stuff. You don't have to be on an island and feel like you're isolated and not be open about it with people, because we can learn from each other. And when you can give pain a purpose, it's interesting how it's easier to digest. It's easier to think, you know what, okay, certain things have happened, but look at the good that's come out of them. So it's kind of a nice way to about perspective, and that's part of the theme of my podcast is just the power of perspective, and just kind of the stories that come with that. I know that you had also mentioned before that you're currently considering creating a workbook for people. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely at the early stages of it. But it kind of builds on that idea of, how can we move people through their trauma journey a little bit, I don't know if it's a little bit faster, but maybe have a few more of those aha moments earlier, and help them that way. The idea was born out of I had once read a book about self-confidence, and it was a workbook, and I found it to be really useful, and I thought that might be a good template of sorts for people who are walking through this post-trauma journey. um, Maybe some of them haven't done any work at all. Maybe some of them have gone to therapy but are, like I mentioned, the different reasons why sometimes therapy isn't working.
Yeah.
Maybe they're having one of those scenarios, or maybe they are working very well and in a healthy way through their post trauma journey, but they just um, maybe could use something that's more of like it takes the thoughts that are maybe jumbled up inside the brain, and we can get them on paper with a pen and really start connecting some dots. So I think there's value there. I haven't seen anything like that out there, and so I'm like, well, maybe I should make this a pet project.
It's a great
Uh,
idea.
you know,
It's a really great idea. I know that, gosh, this was probably maybe a couple years before I wrote my book. I sat by a gentleman on an airplane who had served in Vietnam, and he had told me stories about how he met a number of medics when he was over there who had these shared stories about how they would literally have soldiers who were dying in their arms, but once those soldiers heard the sounds of the Huey helicopters coming to save them, the medics could tell a difference in their vital signs. Hope can
mm,
affect people physically, and it's just something that I think that whether someone's gone through trauma, or maybe they're stressed out, whether it's from work or relationship issues, or a health scare like we've had, things like that. it's interesting how even just having a sense of hope can make a big difference and have a huge impact on somebody's life. So really amazing, amazing stuff. But and I also remember that you were in a documentary. So could you please tell us a little bit about that? It was at an international film festival, correct?
Yeah, I was in a documentary, um, yes, about the bridge, and I'm not sure how widely it got out there. To be honest with you, I know it kind of as they were making it, this thing called COVID happened and shut everything
Oh,
down, and so I know at the film festival that was all just online rather than it being in person, and I know that they were maybe working with the producer was maybe working with HBO to get it somewhere. I
okay.
don't know where that is, but yeah, it was the opportunity. They came to my house, and I had the opportunity to sit down with. I mentioned one of the two folks who had pulled me from my car at the bridge site, the one who lived on along the river was when he grew up, and so I got to sit down and talk to him really in earnest about what had happened, and we got to share our experiences side by side, and it was
Wow.
such an amazingly powerful experience. And I would say more than a few tears were shed
Oh
um,
yeah.
as we were talking, and so it was a good as as much as I think people benefited from those who got to see it. I definitely got to benefit from that experience as well. Just really
Being a
kind of
part of it.
going back to the taking my brain back, because I don't I don't sit around and dwell about the bridge. I don't get emotional much about the bridge, except maybe on the anniversary of the bridge collapse. But I think it is also good to take time to. It's okay to like
Reflect
go
and just
right, go back, reflect, um, get back in touch with it. Like
yeah.
really get in touch with that and sort of reground in it, and not be afraid to do that, even though you're going to be emotional and maybe you don't want to be emotional, but there was definitely some good that happened in that moment, just for me personally.
That's great. I also think that when someone is trying to heal from something, whether it's going through physical therapy or counseling or what have you, rather than being overwhelmed by what might lie ahead, look backwards and reflect on how far you've come. If you can look backwards and see how far you've come, that gives you confidence to move forward and realize that you're making progress, and that can give people just the confidence to, I guess, deal with things head on and not be too overwhelmed by them. But
Yeah,
but
absolutely. We kind of think of progress as just being this straight line, diagonal line going up and to the right? But that's not really what progress is. I mean, they're it's like the stock market, right? And there's the ups and
exactly
downs and the ups and downs, but
right.
that's also progress too. If the end is higher than the start point. So, um, I think we have to keep that in mind too. Progress can look very different, and it's all still meaningful.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I also want to hear about the song that somebody wrote about you. So who
Mm.
wrote it and what's the song? It's a folk song, right? I believe about your experience in the bridge.
Yes, yeah. Yes, I have a folk song about me actually. It's kind of I laugh kind of every time not in a bad way, but I'm proud of it. But it's just something that's kind of out of the blue. Yeah, there's a folk duo named Curtis and Loretta Simonet. They live in Stillwater, Minnesota, and they had received a grant from the state several years ago to write folk songs about different Minnesotans who had some experience, and so the criteria was pretty broad, pretty wide open for them. But they had Loretta had heard about me and my story, and asked to interview me. And so she and I and her husband Curtis sat down one afternoon, and like we're doing today, I shared my story, and she took that story and turned it into lyrics for a folk song that they recorded an entire album of it, and it's one of the songs on the album. So
Wow. So is that
Yeah,
on
just
iTunes or any place where people can find it?
I'm not sure. It's Curtis and Loretta, and the song's called the Bridge, and I'm sure it's out there out there in the internet somewhere. um,
Right.
um,
So
but yes.
so for you to be on the bridge and knowing that the bridge is up to 110 feet high and that it's collapsing, for you to get through that, I mean, obviously the physicality of it, but also the whole healing process that we've just talked about. It's just I'm wondering how it's affected your perspective of other things in life. Is it kind of like, well, if I got through that, I can for sure get through this? I mean, has it made an impact on you as far as how you view things in general, and just maybe instead of things being um, really really hard, you view them more as challenges just to be addressed, as opposed to like having to face things? Or how's your perspective been changed?
Um, I don't think so much like in that way, but I think obviously going through the experience provides opportunities. And I definitely want to take advantage of the opportunities, and how, and really it's about paying it forward. I think for me, um, I would definitely feel like I was not using my skill set if I wasn't trying to continue to help others, and
Mhm.
sort of feeding that why that I was talking about before. Like I very well could have just got better and just continued on life and not shared my story, or doing the things that I'm doing and the things that I want to do, in the name of post trauma and mental health. Um, but so I think there's opportunities there, but there's opportunities for everybody. I mean, we all touch lives, and numerous lives, and we don't even know it,
Yeah,
right? And so,
yeah.
um, I've had people come up to me. Um, in fact, one time I was on a plane. I had my book with me because I like to read it every few years just to kind of remember. Hey,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
remember. But
I can see that.
so I had the book with me, and the man was sitting next to me on the plane. We were flying to Phoenix, and he was kind of looking over at my book, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that," because everybody remembers in Minnesota remembers where they were when the bridge collapsed. And then we sort of got into my story, and I gave him the book, and that was it, right? And then, I don't know, maybe like almost a year later, I got this email from him out of the blue, and he's like, "Yeah, thank you for the book. I didn't tell you at the time, but my wife and I, we were really struggling, and we were on the verge of just calling it quits. And we read your book, and we felt like, if you could get through that, then why can't we try to get through the issues that we're going through, and try to get our marriage back on track." I mean, like, it's like, what? Like,
Wow.
well, I don't know today if they're still together or not, but like, those types of things happen out there in the world. We might never even know them, but we have such impact. All of us do, and all of us have our stories. But all it takes for us is to start just sharing. And so, if I can foster opportunities for sharing for people, I think that's really kind of the direction I want to go.
I
And
could
I think
see
the
that.
bridge has given me the opportunity to do that, right? Like I could have done that before, but I would have maybe never thought that I could. But the bridge gave me I guess the setting, to be able to do that.
Yeah, the platform and the
The
yeah and the
platform, yes.
ability. Yep, I get that. So is there anything that I haven't mentioned or that I haven't asked about that you'd like to call out as part of what you experienced and what you'd like other people to know?
Um, I think we touched on a lot of the main points. Early on when I first went to my first counselor, they told me, they assessed me. They said, well, you do therapy, and 6 months later, you should feel good. You should feel back to whatever normal was. And I really hung on those words, and 6 months came and went, and I didn't feel any better. And a year went by, and I was getting divorced, and 3 years go by, and I'm still not feeling better. And so, I think we have to kind of look at mental health recovery as not as like something we're gonna reach an endpoint on. But I think it's definitely something that we have to just continually work on. Through my years of making mistakes, and I've kind of learned this, and I've learned that if I want to, if I really want to become a, if I really want to master this and beat the triggers, beat this feeling of numbness, beat the fact that I'm triggered, I might lash out, and that might cause damage to a relationship. If I want to best all of that, like I have to understand my trauma. I have to understand what trauma is. I have to understand how it's affecting me. If I don't do that, I can't even begin to start to manage my triggers when I'm being triggered by something. And once I can even start managing those triggers, that's when I can start. Once I start building that habit, then I can start getting close to even maybe attempting to master it. And so right now, I would say I'm at a point where I can notice when I'm being triggered, and I can kind of catch it in the act. And so I still have, like, I'm not saying I'm an expert at this, but I'm saying I'm working towards being a master of mastering my own triggers and trauma. And so I guess what I'm saying is it's a lifelong process, and I know it sucks for a lot of us who have had to go through such terrible trauma. We didn't deserve it. We didn't ask to be put in that place, but we do have to understand that we're there and we've got work to do. And the payoff is that you can live a full life again. You can be happy again. You can be moving forward again. You can have that happiness and joy that at one point you maybe felt you could never have. And that's me. Like, I remember there was a time where I remember specifically telling myself, I'm never going to smile again. I'm never going to laugh again. Like, there's no way. And what a terrible way to live your life, to think that
Right.
way.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you could at least smile and laugh today during the podcast. So this is good.
Yes.
This is really good. So now, where can people buy your book?
The best way is to just contact me directly at garrettebling@gmail.com. I have books here that I'm glad to sell and send out. We live in a Venmo, PayPal type of world right now, so that's probably the best way to do it. There are some books out there. In the past, I did sell them online. I had a website, but I don't do that anymore. So just the best way is to just contact me.
Sounds good. Well, speaking of books, I do want to have a quote here from mine that's about you, because I ended the chapter that I wrote about you in this way. Yes, the bridge had fallen, but he became stronger because of it. His zest for life helped him cheat death by not only surviving his injuries, but learning to truly live because of them. So that being said, Garrett, thank you so much for sharing your story today. Thank you to all of you for listening and watching the podcast. Please feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube for this podcast. And I'll look forward to seeing the audience in the next episode. Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you.